I was in 5th grade, the first time hormones tried to take over my body. I remember it well. It was Mr. Schneider's class, and we were doing math. I even remember the date, March 13th, 1:35 p.m. Mr. Schneider had just handed out the math test, and we were all diligently working on it, when a force that I had never felt before came up through my body, lifted my gaze right off the math test, and soon, with a force I could not begin to resist, it turned my gaze 2 rows over, 2 seats down. That's where Bonnie sat. I liked Bonnie. I liked her a lot. Actually, I'd often walk Bonnie home from school. It wasn't really just Bonnie and I. It was about 7 or 10 kids all together. But I would walk because that gave me a chance to talk with her, even though when I finally got her home, I had to turn and go the other way because I lived in the opposite direction. But it was my chance to be with Bonnie. But I looked at her during math class. Oh, she was lovely. And then the voice inside my head said, "Math, do your math." And I pulled back real quick and I kept doing math problems, but the curve of her lip, I just thought about how lovely it was and how sweet. And soon I was looking 2 rows over and 2 seats forward again, and she had the cutest earlobes. Math. I went back. I kept doing the thing. I liked math, but I couldn't concentrate on it. And every time I started doing the math, suddenly there was this force coming up through me, and my gaze was turning to Bonnie. I looked, and she was concentrating. She was concentrating on her math. She was looking right at the paper, doing it problem by problem. I was concentrating also, but on Bonnie, just looking at her. I brought myself back to the math test one more time, and I was doing it quite well. I knew I was getting the questions correct. And then I came to those signs for long division, and I thought, the curve of her eyebrow. It was so perfect. And her eyebrows had just the right fullness. Soon I finished my math. I put my number 2 pencil down. I looked around. Most of the room was still doing their math. But I looked at Bonnie. She put her pencil down. She also had finished. She looked around the room, and the next thing I know, she smiled at me. I smiled back. And then something very unexpected happened. I got up. You're not allowed to move around during a test in Mr. Snyder's class. But I got up, and I was making my way around the chairs, down the aisle, and soon was standing next to Bonnie's desk. I looked, and Mr. Snyder was grading papers. He hadn't even seen me. I leaned over, I said hello, and Bonnie looked up and smiled and said hello, and we started to talk. And then we looked at each other, and that's when it happened. Our eyes locked. And when they did, it was as if her eyes were tractor beams from the Starship Enterprise. And I was caught. I was just being pulled down. And I looked. I just went, oh. I was looking at her pools, her eyes were these beautiful pools of desire. Hers or mine, I'm not sure, but they were pools of desire. And I drew closer and closer, and she looked up. She turned her chin, just so. And I leaned over and placed my lips directly on hers. It was a wonderful kiss. In 5th grade, who would have thought? Right there in the middle of class, such a kiss. And then everything inside me said, pull back, pull back. And I separated our lips, and I stood up, and as I did, I saw this blurring motion, and then I heard a sound, and I realized, oh, she had slapped me right across the face. I looked at her. Her eyes weren't angry, but the slap had saved her reputation. Good for Bonnie. I stood up. The kids that were sitting around us started to laugh. I didn't even care. It was so totally, completely worth it. I started floating back towards my seat, and Mr. Snyder, hearing the laughter, he looked up and said, "Ken, what are you doing out of your chair?" I said, "Nothing." He said, "Go sit down." "Yes, sir." I went and sat right down. "Not a problem." He hadn't even seen it. I wouldn't get in any trouble unless Bonnie complained. She didn't. I sat there, and I thought, this is the best math class ever. That was my first kiss.